welcome back. I hope that you enjoyed visiting the expo area and that you had an awesome time and networking. Now we are back with an expert talk on a significant topic about the role of HR in developing and implementing strategy. Any strategy will struggle unless it integrates with people's angle. And the people angle is one of the key elements that lifts strategy from slides and moves it into the real world. Well, our next guest is Boris. He will tell us a bit more about what it takes, that it takes great levels of experience, thoughtfulness, and discipline to prioritize upfront the investment into this critical but non-urgent dimension of strategy definition and realization. Well, there are several areas that will be picked up as critical in this expert talk, and therefore I would like to welcome our next guest. It is Boris Dragovic, a Chief Strategy Officer at Hyperoptic. Boris, welcome to the session.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Aleksandra. It's absolutely fantastic to be part of the HR world this time around.
Thank you for joining me in this session, and a huge thanks to Hyperoptic for supporting HR Week. I hope that you are ready to talk about such an interesting topic in the next couple of minutes.
Yes, absolutely. Always ready to talk about strategy and people dimension, right? Or you call it HR dimension, which is the theme for us today. And I have a few thoughts, and I guess I'm somewhat well qualified, having stumbled upon that stone a number of times. So admitting to having ignored HR and people dimensions to strategy execution, and actually learned from the failures or partial failures. So let me start, right? So strategy obviously can be esoteric and can be one of the disciplines which actually require a lot of elements to be in place to execute it, right? So going from why and what of strategy to actually how is not often disconnected in organizations, and one of those elements is actually the people strategy, right? And unfortunately, many of those elements, including the people dimension, fall in those set of really non-urgent but critical elements. What I really want to say is that no strategy can be realized fully and successfully unless the people dimension is tightly integrated. However, at the time of coming up and defining the strategy, it doesn't seem to be urgent, right? It becomes only urgent when we see the effects of not integrating it properly, and then it's often too late, and that's why many strategies struggle. That becomes actually very, very important and prominent in the recent times, including the current COVID, obviously, situation that we are in. And what we are seeing is that more and more of strategies in the recent, 5 years coming forward are essentially very dynamic. A lot about strategies, no matter which industry, is changing. It's about change and transformation. So I can easily say that majority of strategies now, medium to long-term strategies, that's what I mean when I say strategy, do include a very strong and a very heavy change and transformation element to it. And that what brings the people function and people dimension to be even more critical if the strategy execution is going to change. The reasons that strategies are becoming such are a number, but 2 or 3 main reasons are: one, we are all living through the digital, transition to digital in just about everything, right? It's a big inflection point, and we are seeing a lot of business models change, right? That's only supported by COVID and emphasized by COVID, where not only the business models changed, but also the ways of working and what actually the employees expect of the job and the workplace, and what they are looking at to get back for themselves from any career, right? So that's becoming really critical and a super interesting dimension that actually adds to the importance of having the people function sit at the table of the strategy definition. So overall, Aleksandra, I think to summarize, people dimension is super important, but often gets neglected until a bit too late, right?
Let's talk a bit more about C-level suit. Why should they even consider involving HR into discussion around strategy development and, of course, execution?
Sure, there is having said all of that, I said that, and maintaining that a lot about strategy nowadays is about change and transformation, right? So there is a few things that I would like to, the pillars that I would like to underline, and that's why, C-level should integrate and have partners in HR, right, in people function. One role is what I, always kind of bucket around right people in the right roles, effective teams, and including talent reallocation. I'm going to come back to that, but that's one of the three, right? The second one is the capacity to deliver and absorb change. As I said, a lot about strategies about change nowadays across the industries. And the third one is something that's always neglected and misunderstood, which is organizational health and maintaining that organizational health. I'll also say a few words about it. So coming back to the right people in the right roles, I've just read today, actually, and I'll be quoting McKinsey maybe a few times here. You will forgive me for that. So, for example, taking Croatia, right? There was a recent study on Croatian workforce and the jobs, and the conclusion is that between 6 and 8%, if I remember well, of jobs will be redefined until 2030, right? So there is a lot of change going on, and strategies need to account for that, and how they do that is through the people function. So the people function at the point of choosing the right strategic scenario around that very table when strategic scenarios are being drawn needs to feed in and integrate the view of what is the talent in the company, what's talent that's available in the market, what are the mindsets, how the mindsets need to shift, and how to get from where we are to where we need to be, right? So that's one.
Okay, let's tackle a bit. Sorry, the internet is lagging, of course.
Yeah,
have you finished your sentence, or did I interrupt you?
No, I just wanted to say a few more words about the change, right, which is the second element. And as I said, change is super important, right? And it's actually the people team that needs to feed the strategy function on 4 elements, essentially. How to role model. And we've seen that more than 60%, according to research, more than 60% of strategy implementations fail because of either management behavior or wrong management behaviors and employee actually resistance to change, right? So what is the role modeling? How do we communicate the story of the change? How we develop the talent is the third one. And then what are the reinforcement mechanisms? There always needs to be some hard mechanisms such as incentives, motivations, and so on at the bottom, right? So that's about the change. And let me just add the third thing, which is, how to keep this going, right? Because it's one thing to define the strategy and even implement it, but you want a long-lasting effect. And that's where I go into organizational health, which essentially is all about alignment, ability of organization to execute and to renew itself, right? So people team, and people team is pretty much the only team in an organization of today who can connect these dots and guide the strategy definition, but also the execution, right?
Let's talk a bit more about the current prevailing practices versus HR inclusion as a peer in strategy discussions. What is your opinion on this? How do we move forward?
So, as I said, unfortunately, and myself being guilty of the sin, right? HR is often not in the room when strategy is being defined, decided, and approved, right? And given everything that I've said so far, it's a huge mistake, right? Not to do that. It's only unfortunately visible later, especially as we're living through change times. What can we do? So that's one of the toughest questions that you get, right? And I think it's basically the mindset shift problem. There is, I think, a body of evidence that shows that a people team should come forward proactively with a number of tools that go through organizational designs to talent mapping, to essentially mapping the capabilities to the organizational strategy, right, up front to the executives in charge of the strategy execution, right? It's more difficult to do than to say than to do, right? Obviously, however, hoping that COVID is actually and this increased pace of change is actually going to help us realize how important HR and people function actually is, right?
Yes. Let's say, for example, that HRs have a seat at the strategic table. What would be some concrete suggestions from your experience for HRs to deliver as a value to the C-level agenda, besides some of them that you already mentioned?
Exactly, that there is more and less obvious areas, right? And I think there are more traditional areas that boards and the executive suites are used to, such as, do we have the talent to execute? However, as I said, that gets deprioritized often in the interest of pushing out and approving the strategy in the first place. But I think there is those less obvious ones, which is coming up, first of all, with the sentiment of the organization, right? Secondly, is coming up and driving the communication story of the strategy, right? And the communication plan, which can or normally sits in corporate communication, but given that it should increasingly motivate people in the face of change and actually help people perform and retain people in the positions that we want, it should probably sit in many organizations or have a heavy influence of the people function, right? And when I'm talking about that, that's really the question of what is the source of meaning for employees in a strategy. It can be anything around, there is actually 5 sources of meaning if you look at the literature. There is a society, there is company and shareholder, there is customer, how do we make things better for the customer, there is the team environment, and then there is personal motivators, right? So HR has a pretty difficult task in actually grounding the executives when they're defining strategy and telling them, hey, this is the talent that we have, this is the talent that we need, this is the story, and this is actually, given the current situation in the organization and in the marketplace, the amount of change that we can absorb in this timeline, right? Those are the major discussions that people teams should be bringing about when discussing strategies, right?
Yeah. And there's a great pressure on HRs to find a balance between what employees want and what companies can either provide financially or in various resources, or just to tackle with the challenges that C-level puts upon them, right? So the challenges are great, but in order to help them a little bit throughout this expert talk, could you give us a couple of examples of HR engagements that you deem as value adding to the company strategy, of course?
So absolutely, I said what we are pretty, weak about, and talking from experience, and my most recent experience is actually, you mentioned, there is a trade-off between what employees want and what company can provide, right? There is actually very little structured pulse around what that actually is, right? and it gets more difficult because of all of this remote working, right? But also different generations have different wants and asks and expectations, right? And secondly, it's about, you know, what company should do about it. And I mean, what it should be doing in terms of, you know, there is also a management of that element. So educating the workforce, developing the right culture on what to expect short, medium, and long term from the engagement. So all of that people strategy should actually be doing is bringing the circling, you know, going around the circle of actually saying, so this is the talent we have, this is what they expect, right? This is how we can create a win-win between what company can do and what employees expect in order for them to deliver. And there is a lot of talk, you know, especially in at our home country, on direct monetary benefits. And we've all talked about, you know, it's not only about the money, it's a lot about the money and the right incentives, but there is also the dimensions of the dimension is, you know, societal dimension, right? Are we contributing to the society? There is, you know, are we making the company better? You know, are we developing the people to progress in their careers? Are we supporting the customer and putting, you know, smile on customers' faces, right? And, you know, all of these dimensions should come together and be well communicated as part of the let's say reward or incentive package, right? Which is currently, I think, very much focused on the direct pay and bonus, right?
Yeah, I can see here that we have a couple of questions from the audience that we can go through because we have enough time, luckily. One of the questions is, in your opinion, why is it hard for C-level to perceive HRs as people who should have a seat at the strategic table?
Well, that's a very good question, first of all, and there is several sides to it. And again, saying, you know, being that in that role, guilty of that kind of behavior several times, there is, you know, one element is pressure, right? And, you know, pressure to deliver certain performance, and then what you're thinking of is essentially, how do I do it? But how do I do it mechanically in terms of, you know, what do I do to my business, and not actually who is going to enable it and how, right? So it's kind of, you know, we are going to deal with the soft topics, you know, our people are capable, they'll figure out a way, right? Which is wrong, right? Especially if change is involved. So the first reason is, you know, stress, pressure, and so on to deliver, which is not getting easier given you know, ever increasing target levels, paces of delivery that are required, and so on. So I think that's one. The second, also because of that, is the perception that, you know, people processes are very slow, right? So even shareholders look at, you know, investors and so on, they want change to happen quickly, they want results quickly. And if we talk about mindsets, behavior, even talent search, and not only having the person with the right experience, but the big learning is it's so difficult to find people with the right experience to actually fit into the team that we have and the organizational culture. It's slow, right? We are immediately talking 6 to 12 months plus, right? So the easiest way to actually go around it is to cut off and minimize people team involvement and say, you know, you do your stuff, we need to focus on strategy first, and then we'll deal with the people topics, which is a huge mistake, right? Because 2 years down the line, you see you're not delivering.
Yeah. You mentioned the people processes being too slow. Is it maybe that there is a lack of understanding how these processes are complex? They're not simple. Maybe the complexity makes them slower. Is it maybe this that adds to the way the C-level sees HRs?
That's a fantastic point, right? And as I say, with people aspect actually going up in the a list of priorities, given the level of change that I mentioned we are going through. I didn't mention processes are slow in a negative way, in terms of them, being potentially being faster. I meant just from the nature of the human being, intrinsics, mindset, and behavior modeling and shifting. It just has to be slow, right? And that's if you want to achieve the right effect, right? We are not, we cannot shift the whole workforces from one type of behavior or set of behaviors to another unless we work on the fundamentals, and that takes time, right? So absolutely, education of the C-level, and thank you for mentioning it, would be basically one of the key ingredients.
Yeah, this would be a great suggestion, also a key takeaway from this expert talk, along all the other key takeaways that you mentioned. Now, in all this debate about how C-level perceives HRs, we have an interesting question. Did COVID make HRs better looking in the eyes of C-level when we think about everything they did throughout the COVID situation last year?
Well, I don't think the C-suites are actually ripe enough yet, right? In general, if you ask me, I think a lot of C-level people are asking themselves, what do we do now, right? In terms of, the ways of working have changed. And as I said, more importantly, people have realized and crystallized what they are looking from job experience, right? And we are not going back, right? So for sure, to where we started from. The question is where we will end. But I think the C-levels are not yet there. They're still, trying to figure out, so what do we do, rather than honing in on, people team, you're the experts, what's the strategy, right? What do we do now? I think there is another opportunity there, and that's for people teams and HR teams to jump up, right, with all the experience and expertise they have, and serve the scenarios.
Thank you. Let's finish off this session with a final question and recommendation from your side. We are, even you and I and all the other people who are listening to Expert Talk, we are all aware that in the majority of companies, HR are not perceived as major value contributor to the executive agenda. For final minutes of the session, what would be your recommendation for HR in those companies, and what steps do they need to take in order to change the perception of the executive board?
Well, I think HR teams should. I'm just looking at my current role, but also a set of previous roles. There is a lot of psychologists doing HR, which is fantastic, actually. I think we should ask ourselves: are we leveraging that expertise enough, right? Even to influence the C-level. I mean, we are all full of biases. Me being a chief strategy, right? Previously assumed other C-level positions. We are full of biases. We are prone to pressure and so on. We want results quickly. People team actually should be number one partner, right? And we should, through education, through bringing out coherent picture of what's going on inside the organization, right? I think we've had too many, let's say, siloed individual points of, customer satisfaction this, or employee satisfaction this, employee satisfaction that. People teams should, kind of make a coherent picture of the, organizational health and capacity to execute and talent, and bring it up and serve it in front of the C-level and say, listen, you want to go faster or better or more effective and efficient, you need to talk to us, right?
Boris, this is an awesome session. Thank you for sharing so important and precise suggestions for HRs from your own experience, which is really important for any expert talk. I enjoyed this session. I hope the audience enjoyed it as well. So thank you once again. Key takeaways have been brought up here, which is amazing. And I also hope that you enjoyed the session as well.
Thank you very much. It has been fantastic. I hope that everybody liked it. Yeah.
Yeah, let's bring HRs closer to the C-level. Thank you, Boris. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.